You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster, Steve Richards, and the political commentator and former Conservative Special Advisor, Sal Mashar. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Times quotes the General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, insisting that Rishi Sunak needs to get a grip and agree to negotiate over pay with striking nurses. The Mail reports that hospitals are being urged to discharge as many patients as they can before next week's ambulance strikes. The Express understands the King wants to make peace with Prince Harry after the disclosures of intimate family conversations in his and Meghan's Netflix docuseries. The Mirror says that whether or not they reach a resolution, His Majesty doesn't intend to address the matter publicly. And according to the Telegraph, the Sussexes will be invited to the coronation in May. The Guardian carries allegations that traces of a substance believed to be cocaine were found at a country house used by Liz Truss during her short-lived premiership. Ms Truss has insisted the claims are categorically untrue. The Sun claims the singer Gary Glitter will soon leave prison, having served around half of his 16-year sentence for child sex offences. The Financial Times says the investment bank, Goldman Sachs, intends to make 4,000 of its staff redundant in an attempt to boost profits. And The Star hears that certain perfumes for sale this Christmas apparently contain ingredients more usually found in a lavatory. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Steve Richards and Sal Mashar. Welcome to both of you. Let us start with the Mirror and their coverage of the Lady Susan and Ngozi Fulani incident that happened at the palace. They have now met. A warm meeting, we're told, and Lady Susan has apologised in person. Steve?
Well, I think this is a sort of story with a wider message about the need for the monarchy to modernise. I'm still not quite sure what the role of lady in waiting is, if that is the title of the person who's apologised. Forgive me when I forget the names. I really don't follow the ins and outs of the royal family with interest.
Lady Susan Hussey.
And the reason I don't, I kind of vaguely knew her husband, Duke Hussey, when he was chair of the BBC. But you see, there's a sort of impression, and it's a dangerous one, that we know all these people. We know the context in which quotes appear. And we really don't. But if she has some kind of reconciliation, I guess that's a good thing. But it's a relatively peripheral thing, frankly, compared with these sort of bizarre roles and titles and everything that accompany the paraphernalia of the monarchy at the end of another week where the soap opera has reached intense and in some ways, I think, quite significant proportions, but that's a different story.
Salma's giggling. Salma, what do you make of it all? They're pictured both smiling.
Actually, I'm surprised at Steve's cynicism in all of this, because actually it seems to be a lovely story to me. Two people had a falling out, and it's one of those things that's become a bit of a culture clash in the UK, understanding people's backgrounds, understanding where they come from. And we've had actually a grown-up resolution to this conflict, in that Lady Susan Hussey made some comments that were offensive. And, people felt hurt by it, but they've come together, they've apologised, they've accepted the apology has been accepted, and we've now been able to move forward. I think it's a really good example of how you can do something without conflict. Let's just ignore the wider point that you're making, Steve, for just a slight moment, and just focus on the fact that actually you can get through a conflict and you can resolve it without, continuing with strong language and sort of whipping up people's prejudices.
But Salma, go ahead, Steve.
No, it's a really nice photo, and I completely agree with what Salma has been saying about it. It's just, it is so difficult to comment on these things compared, say, with politics, where actually you can really delve deep and get to know the people and what they represent and so on. We really are always sort of on the surface at best with these stories, and I'm sort of uneasy about them. And even when I hear royal specialists commentating, I'm never wholly sure about how much they know, and I can't pretend to know anything about it. So, but I agree, it's a lovely photo.
And Salma, just briefly, do you think this has drawn a line under this issue? Because Ngozi Fulani faced a barrage, a backlash on social media. And it is a photo. Is it a PR stunt to say that everything's all right, but really we've just scratched the surface?
Look, ultimately, everything like this you can categorize it as a PR stunt because it's a communication to the public that is trying to manage a situation. So you can absolutely be cynical about it, but ultimately both women have come together and they're trying to put their differences aside. And I think Lady Hussey has been open about the fact that she is willing to be a bit more educated and aware about the issues that sometimes cause offence to people. Everybody in this country who is from an ethnic minority background probably has some experience of being asked, where are you really from? I know I have, but the intention isn't malicious. But in the statement that's released by Buckingham Palace, it draws out the horrific abuse that Ngozi Fulani has been experiencing on social media and condemns it. And I think that was a really important thing to do as well. And people do get wound up by these things. Steve is right. It's all these figures that don't really mean anything to anybody, but it doesn't stop people from feeling hurt, upset, becoming a keyboard warrior about it and trolling others on Twitter. So I think it's actually really positive. Even if it is just one photo, it draws the line somewhere and moves it on.
OK, we're going to stay with the royal family, to your delight, Steve. And we read in the Express that King Charles wants to make peace with Harry, or is still seeking peace with Harry.
Yeah, of course. He's a father of a son, and also what would be the bigger story, him briefing one way or another that he was going to take on his son and challenge him and exclude him from the coronation. That would fuel this drama. And so the sensible thing is to brief that is what is happening. I actually don't think this isn't the significance of this story is the internal feud within the royal family. I think it is much more, and I have watched some of the Netflix episodes. It's a sort of Diana-like insurrection, actually against the media, much more than within the royal family. And I think it's brave of them. I'm on their side with this. I mean, I think newspapers in Britain are still out of control post that Diana period. And it's very brave to take them on. And one of the reasons why there is so much angry coverage is that newspapers can dish it out in Britain, but they really don't like taking it. And so I think it's a very interesting insurrection, but I think it is more a revolt against the media, but it obviously then has explosive implications for a royal family that has to work with the media. So that is the route which I think is very interesting.
That is an interesting take, and not one that many people have taken, Steve. To the Mirror, and we read there that the King and the other royals have opted for silence. Salma, is that the best option, or should they really be answering some of Harry's claims?
Well, I think the problem is that, as it says, that they're putting dignity first, because they are still public figures. They are still important constitutionally. The king is the head of state, and playing this out and, trying to respond to it, there are no winners there. And he's got an important job that he needs to get on it and do, and not be sidetracked by what is essentially a family drama playing out. Now, that's not to try and minimize what the Duke and Duchess of Sussex feel, they've endured and encountered. But it's one of those things that even I feel sort of uncomfortable talking about it, because it is essentially a private family matter. And I think it's for the king and the royal family to deal with this privately. Trying to respond to it and trying to do it through the papers is not going to be helpful for anyone in this situation.
And Steve, do you think that's wherein the problem lies, that Prince Harry has been guilty of washing dirty laundry in public, and it's a private affair, but now that he has made it public, it's very difficult for the rest of the royal family?
Yeah, although I think they have opted for the only route available for them, which is a sort of dignified silence, where no doubt those around them will brief newspapers at a certain point, and journalists will phone in and say, "Oh, is the king going to retaliate against this?" And the briefing is, "No, he won't. He wants to seek some kind of reconciliation," to use that word again. That becomes a front page story, and on it goes. But as I say, I think the most interesting element of it really is, I always wondered what would have happened had Diana lived, in terms of the impact on the royal family and the media of this kind of frankly insurrectionary figure. We don't have many troublemakers in the British establishment, and this duo, whether you like them or not, are troublemakers. And they're clearly not going to be silenced. They're clearly doing it for all kinds of motives. But I think one of them is that Diana-related horror of the way the media treats public figures, including themselves. And I know people are going to say immediately, but they manipulate the media. Sure, so did Diana and so do many others. But I think it is, on that level, quite brave of them. And I think there will be waves and consequences arising from it, which are quite interesting.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Let's have a look at the Times and the quote there on the front page: "Sunak needs to get a grip." Who is saying this and why, Salma?
Well, this is Pat Cullen, the union chief of the nurses, who actually, what this piece shows is that tensions are rising in these negotiations, because there has been some briefing to the Times to suggest that Steve Barclay, the health secretary, has been quite confrontational in meetings, which of course has been denied by the government. And so the union bosses are asking Rishi to get a grip on the situation. And, you know, it's even worse than just the sort of a situation about pay. At the end of the piece, there is some discussion about foreign nurses being brought in from Africa and Asia being likened to trafficking of nurses. So the language is getting increasingly hostile, I think, and it doesn't bode well for these negotiations to come to any kind of conclusion. At the same time, as we're going to talk about in a bit more detail, that hospitals are being asked to discharge patients to free up beds.
Yes, and Steve, Pat Cullen is pinning the blame personally on Steve Barclay, it seems, accusing him of failing to value caring professionals dominated by women and struggling to control his anger during face-to-face talks. It's not going well at all.
No, and, you know, in a way, of course, the key to any resolution is in the substance, but tone matters too. You know, if you've got a sense that you're in negotiation with someone who you can respect and to some extent trust, there is greater scope for coming together. Clearly, the relationship between Pat Cullen and Steve Barclay is pretty disastrous, with her comments on him. And as you say, they deny it, but I mean, all we've got is that's what she thinks of him. So on that level, it's not working. It is interesting. The Sunak role is, I find fascinating. I assumed that although in some ways he would be quite a weak figure, it's a massively fast elevation to the top, that he would have language and a certain authority. But both seem to me to be lacking in this. He's a rather ghostly figure in the context of the public narrative of the government's position. And I wonder, like a lot of chancellors who become prime minister, he has yet anyway, and I know he's a human being and it's all very sudden that he's in number 10, he can't really master a whole series of crises at the same time, which is the art of leadership at the very top. In the Treasury, you prepare for a budget, a public spending statement. Here, you've got to really be on top of everything all the time. And I see little evidence that he is.
Salma, do you agree with that?
I think it's slightly unfair to Rishi because this is not a sort of normal period of government. He hasn't come in as leader, coming out of opposition with a game plan. They had a leadership contest that was essentially, as we all know, pretty bungled because we've had 3 prime ministers this year. But Rishi Sunak as Chancellor had to deal with the pandemic. He is now, as Prime Minister, having to deal with the economic consequences of that pandemic, alongside a pretty ropey budget, I might say, that only occurred a couple of months ago. So trying to manage, whilst I agree with that, the art of leadership is managing several crises at a time. I do think that actually, given where he is in the cycle, given what he's actually facing, there is an argument to suggest that actually he is allowing his cabinet, and in this case his health secretary, to deal with it.
Yeah.
If he does need to step in, then that's going to be a much bigger deal.